Hello, this is Kathleen Ralph, creator of the webcomic Hope and Harry. I know how important support is for creators, which is why I support Andy and Derek and the Comics Alternative through Patreon.
This is the Comics Alternative, on location and talking with creators at Small Press Expo 2015, Part 3. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative on location. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And this is the third of our 3 on-location interview shows. Both Andy and I went to Small Press Expo last weekend. We interviewed a lot of people, so many that we had to divide the interviews among 3 different on-location interview shows. Now, on Thursday and Friday, we put up shows 1 and 2. This is the third show, and one of the things that's notable about this is, I guess, a couple of things, Andy. One, this is the first time we've been to a con and have conducted so many interviews that we had to divide them among 3. I know when we were at Heroes Con, I think we only got 2 shows worth of interviews, but this is 3. This is also notable because this is the first, and I would guess about only time, we put up a podcast episode on a Saturday.
So this is historic.
This is historic. And you know you're definitely getting your money's worth this week on the Comics Alternative.
That's right.
Yeah. But before we get started with those conversations, we want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative on location at SPX is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some wonderful, incredible, unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials are at 45% off cover price, sometimes at 50% off cover price, and often you'll find discounts that are much more impressive than that.
And man, will you find some bundles at DCB Service. You can find DC bundles, Marvel bundles. There is an exceptional 2, actually, Vertigo bundles, bundle number 1 and bundle number 2, as well as a Valiant bundle. And all of these are 50% off of the normal price, except for the Vertigo bundle number 1, which is 75% off.
That's just unbelievable. I can't believe it, Andy.
I can't either.
But you know, we and our listeners will have to go to the website to just see if this actually exists. So check out dcbservice.com for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics at Discount Comic Book Service, please do send them an email and tell them that the 2 guys with PhDs sent you.
That's right.
So the conversations that we have on this third episode will be with Amy Godfrey and Patrick Holt, Will Dinski, R. Sikoryak, Jay Hosler, Nick Bertozzi, Jason Little, Simon Rinehardt, and Mickey Zacchilli.
Yeah, that's another great lineup.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and start listening to that lineup.
Let's do.
I ran across this yesterday and I didn't have time to come take a look at it. There's a book called The Durham Comics Project, and I'm speaking with Amy Godfrey, and I'm really, really excited about hearing more about this since I am a librarian, and anytime I see anything connected with the library. What can you tell us about the project, Amy?
So Durham Comics Project started about 2.5 years ago. It was part of Durham County Library. I used to work there as a children's librarian, and I was one of the co-organizers of our annual comics festival. And the idea of the project was I wanted to collect stories of people in Durham in comics form, kind of like StoryCorps with comics. So I spent a year and a half offering free comics workshops all throughout Durham and teaching people how to tell their stories in comics. And then we did a call for submissions for short autobiographical comics. The book is a compilation of what we've received. Some of them are very directly a product of like the workshops I'd run, and like when you look through the book, you might notice there are certain themes in some of them because of like exercises we had given, and some of them were just things that people who saw the call submitted. Our youngest submission was our artist was from 6 years old. We have artists who are up in their 70s and everything in between. We have artists who are professional comics artists who have been doing this for years, and we have people who had never drawn a comic before in their life. So there's like a pretty good cross-section of both skill level, age, and just like different folks represented in Durham in different places.
Now, were all of these creators from Durham, or did they have a connection with Durham?
Yeah, so part of the requirements is that they needed to be living in the greater Durham area. So even if they weren't in Durham proper, the region, yeah.
Now, does all the proceeds go to the Friends of the Library?
Yes. I mean, so the proceeds go to the Friends of the Library and kind of are just getting kind of cycled back into funding Durham Comics Project at the moment. Yeah.
So what's it been like to put this together?
It's been really great. This has been a really wonderful experience. I've met, I feel like there's a really great community has started to form around this project. One of the things that we do is I organize a monthly drink and draw for the past 2 years. That we have a good solid group of 18 to 20 people who come out each month, and I've met a lot of people who are into comics in the Durham area that I had never known before, and I've met people who have been into comics and never tried drawing before they started doing this project, and now regularly draw comics. One person who had told me that they never thought they could draw and they'd never drawn before, and then after doing a comic for the Durham Comics Project decided to start taking art classes and and that was kind of fun and exciting.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I know that as a librarian, one of the challenges for me, the library that I work at does not have a huge graphic novel readership over a certain age. We have lots of teens, lots of kids that read graphic novels. What has this project done for maybe some of the people that are older than teenage to get them recognizing graphic novels, and has it drawn a lot of people to the library?
That is a good question. It's definitely so one thing Durham Comics Project has been really successful in is getting that older group coming to library programs that hadn't necessarily been involved in library programs before. It's done a very good job of reaching an audience that our library has traditionally had trouble reaching. One thing that we did do, though, that is a little unconventional is a lot of our events don't happen at the library proper, but happen at off-site locations. Which seems to have been very successful, which is kind of interesting because when we'd have some of the events at the library, we would get less good of turnout than if we had the event at a coffee shop downtown. And so we're kind of bringing the library to them, but finding different ways of making the library relevant for this particular audience of people that we had been having a lot of trouble reaching, which is kind of I would say 20s to 30s range. We get a good cross-section of ages who are involved in this project and who come to the drink and draw, but particularly 20s, early 30s is the age range that we had a lot of trouble getting people to library programs, and this has managed to do that, yeah.
We're having a tough time, too, getting that same demographic. Yeah. We get, as most libraries do, we get a lot of children, we get a lot of senior citizens, but not much in the middle unless they're parents, but that type of thing. So that's great to hear that you had some great success doing off-site stuff. Now Durham is a pretty big library system, right?
Yeah.
How many branches do you have?
We have 7 locations.
So now, have you talked to other people that have, or other libraries that have said, "Wow, this is a great idea. We would like to do this as well"?
Not yet, actually.
Okay, well, you're talking to one now.
I guess at the moment we are, yeah.
Well, what type of advice would you give for any library system that wants to do something, and maybe it might not be something like putting an anthology together like you did here, but to make comics more approachable to their patrons?
I think one of the things we've done that's been really successful with Durham Comics Project and the Comics Fetch, which I co-organized with Patrick Holt, who's also a librarian.
Hello.
Just introduce you to
Nice to meet you.
Is we focus a lot of our comics programming, especially like our Comics Fest, on creation. And so it's less about like talking about comics and like fanboying about comics, which is fun and good, but like can also be restrictive to a very limited set of people in their appreciation of comics.
And those things are also very well represented in other events that go on in our town. So we're lucky to have that already there.
Yeah, we have NC Comic Con that happens in Durham, which kind of covers that aspect of comics appreciation, and so we tend to focus a lot on creation. And so like when we have artists come, we ask them to come and talk about like how to make comics, and we do a lot of like have visiting artists come and give like workshops and like work directly with people, and then like the Durham Comics Project, which was all about like teaching people how to make comics, and then the drink and draws, which are like giving people exercises and like everybody working on comics together. And so they're all very like interactive, and it's also all about like participating, like not so much as like observing this like phenomenon that we appreciate, but like how can we make you a part of it?
Yeah, getting in there and actually doing it.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. Patrick, what can you tell us about your involvement with the project?
Well, it was all initiated by Amy, so I'm lucky to have had her as a way in. It's been a mutual project. That phrase doesn't quite make sense, but we've worked together on a lot of aspects of it. And particularly now that Amy has moved on from the library, I'm sort of having moved from the second in command to the lead for the fest. And so the basic idea is to just keep it going along these same ideas, keep bringing folks who, people in our town are interested in seeing. This last year we had more than 500 people come through our various events, and so we just really want to keep that energy going and see who we can partner with locally and elsewhere. We're lucky to have a good number of folks in the region, as well as having the funding from our friends at the library to bring folks in from across the country and so on. So,
and to bring you guys here too, right?
Also, yes, which was really great. So,
have you guys been to SPX before?
Amy has.
I have, just with my own personal comics and not as a library.
Well, thank you guys so much for talking with me today, and I look forward to, actually I'm going to pick up a copy of this and look forward to reading that, and I may be picking your brains later about how to do something like this with my library system too. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Still at SPX 2015, and I'm at the table of Will Dinski. He is the creator of Quick and Painless, and also I see another book here, Fingerprints. But I want you to talk about specifically Quick and Painless, which are a collection of short stories, because you were recommended to me by Dan Stafford at Kilgore Books. So, Will, first off, how is the convention going?
Oh, very good. Yeah, it's very good. I think that in particular, like Dan, I know probably recommended this book because for a while, one of the stories in here called "Covered in Confusion," he would sell a lot in his shop in Denver, which was basically a story that I had overheard about an old teacher. So it's a fictionalized accounting of a very shameful event of an old teacher of mine. But the collection, Quick and Painless, is just a lot of the short stories that I did in my 20s or late 20s. Things that I had made a lot of like intricate handmade books of previously in very limited quantities and selling at shows at SPX. And then, and then I would run out, or I would run out of the ability to make them the way that I could before. So I've collected them all into one big volume, and been selling it here at this show.
So now, again, I was not familiar with your work, but and then Dan suggested that I meet you. So for both me and also our listeners, educate us. What are your comics about? What can I find when I get Quick and Painless?
Well, I would say, especially with Quick and Painless, there's a lot of different stories. I don't have any one kind of character that I do. It's generally kind of slice of life stuff or just something that's interesting to me. I've got so this particular collection has got 12 different 2-page stories in between some of the other longer short stories, and those have got little tiny button-sized characters, and they're all kind of expressing just an emotion that I had that day. And I would just kind of sit down in the morning, have a cup of coffee, figure out how I was feeling that day, and then I would write a kind of short comic about that. And then between those, I'll have stories let's see here. This one here is about me going to do the Scientology test. You go and do the personality test, and going in and then I've got all the different questions that they would ask, and then I have my personality results from the Scientologists. And then I've got a few things in here that I've done with other artists, or in particular just one other writer, Mark Ealing, and I've illustrated a couple of his stories. Let's see.
So some of these are autobiographic in nature?
Just that one. Okay. Really, okay. Actually, yeah.
Now, you were describing the shorter pieces where you sit down and you write about how you're feeling.
Yeah.
Are those more like diary-type stories where more reflective of your mood at the time?
They're more reflective of the mood. So I would try and kind of distill what that emotion would feel like. And then, like today I'm hungover. And so I've got a comic about what it would be like to you have a day where you want to be really ambitious, but you're really hungover, and so it would be just a story about a hero.
Did you create one of those as you were sitting here?
That one is here. He Fighter Wins is in here, and that's also in here, and so it's kind of trying to express that emotion just in fiction.
Okay.
Yeah, but it very quickly. Yeah.
So what about Fingerprints?
That is a story that is, I always say, would be about the downfall of cosmetic surgery. It's kind of a sci-fi fictional exploration of cosmetic surgery and celebrity culture. Yeah.
And you were talking earlier about at least many of the comics in Quick and Painless. You had created the books themselves, the mini comics.
Yeah.
So I guess you're into the actual book creation itself, the materiality of the product.
Yeah, like a lot of these pieces that I have here are letterpress. I actually really like making the physical object quite a bit. I'll work with other publishers on things, but even then I like to kind of really pay attention and get into how it's printed or the construction of it. And even if I will have something published, I'll tend to make my own version of it, something that I can make very personalized, just for fun, yeah.
Are you pursuing other publishers for your work?
Oh, sure. I work with 2D Cloud quite a bit. I've done books through them. Fingerprints was with Top Shelf. Absolutely. Yeah, it's fun to collaborate with people who you kind of see eye to eye with on certain projects, and you can kind of help get the word out about work together. It's nice.
Well, I hope that this bit of the podcast will help get the word out about your work. So, Will, if our listeners wanted to find out more about your comics, how could they do so? Your website, your Tumblr, how?
I have a website. It's also my Tumblr. So willdinski.com, WILLDINSKI. Send me an email.
Okay, so could they purchase your comics through that?
No, they really have to go to SPX or some other show. I don't tend to. I mean, if you send me an email, I'll send you a book. But I don't really have a shop. Or you can go to 2dcloud.com. Actually, they have work of mine or Top Shelf. You can buy books for me there as well.
Okay, well, Will, thank you very much for taking the time and talking for the podcast.
Thank you very much.
I'm sitting here with R. Sikoryak at SPX 2015. Bob, how are things going with you at the con?
Things are going great. I have been seeing a lot of panels, and I love SPX. I've been coming here for years, so it's fun to be back.
Yeah. Now, I envy you when you say that you've been able to go to some of these panels. I could have gone to the panels, but I feel guilty because if I'm at the panels, I'm not scouting out people to interview for the podcast, and that's one of the main reasons why I'm here.
Right. Well, we all have to make our choices, I guess.
Yes, exactly. So now, I specifically wanted to talk with you when we were emailing back and forth, and we have been over the past year and a half, because of the work that you do in terms of adaptation and the work that I do in adaptation. Now, your work is completely different than mine in that you do it in comics form, but I write about people who adapt in comics form. And both of us have the distinction of being in a relatively recent issue of Hawthorne Review that was devoted to, what was it, Hawthorne and Humor, I think it was.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and your Scarlet Letter adaptation was in there. And I referenced that in my essay on Hawthorne in recent comics. And that was then collected previously, though, in your quite big, literally, book, Masterpiece Comics. Now, for those who aren't familiar with Masterpiece Comics, how would you describe it to them?
Well, very briefly, what I do is I take pieces of classic literature and I adapt them into comics, specifically in the styles and formats of famous American comics. So, for instance, I did the Scarlet Letter in the style of Little Lulu. So Little Lulu becomes Pearl, Little Pearl, who's the daughter of Hester Prynne. I've done a retelling of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment in the style of 1950s Batman comics, where where Raskolnikov becomes Batman. So I take works where I feel that there is some overlap, or sometimes there's absolutely no overlap between the American comic sources and the literary sources, and combine them in ways that I try to be faithful to both sources, with the understanding that this is an absurd project and that it's kind of an impossibility to be faithful to both sources. So hopefully the humor comes through the bizarre juxtaposition, but ultimately I think that I'm trying to sort of pay homage to both classic sources.
Yeah. Now, when did you start doing this, and how did you come to begin doing this kind of comic work?
Well, Actually, one of my earliest pieces that was published was an adaptation of stories by John Cage, the American composer, and he wrote these short anecdotes about his life, personal stories, that he would perform in front of an audience, and he would read each one in a minute. So if it was a very long story, he'd have to read it very quickly to fit within 60 seconds, and if it was a very short story, he would read it very slowly so that it would take a minute. And I was very influenced by his approach to music and his interest in taking his personality or his personal preferences out of the work that he made, and that was really appealing to me. So what I did was I took his stories, and because there was sort of the constraint of the time in which they were told in concert, what I did was I took those stories and tried to tell them in the form of traditional newspaper comics, American newspaper comics. So this seemed like there was a parallel in what he was doing, what I was doing, and also I wasn't trying to impose my style upon the comics, but what I did was I chose these styles from Peanuts, Pogo, Popeye, Prince Valiant, Mary Worth, Crazy Cat, and used those styles to retell his stories. And in doing that story, I felt like I kind of hit on a new way of making comics for myself that took kind of my preferences out of the equation. I certainly choose the sources that I combine, but in terms of the way I tell the stories, it's totally up to the style of the comic that I am using as source material.
So what we know now as your Masterpiece Comics actually has a musical genesis.
I guess you would say that, yeah. I've never been musical myself, but I've certainly been influenced by music.
What was the first adaptation of a work of literature into comics form that you did.
Yeah, well, the cage thing sort of put an idea in the back of my head, but a year or two later, I was very honored to be asked to do a page for Raw magazine, which was the anthology that Art Spiegelman and Françoise Mouly edited, which was hugely influential to me and to many cartoonists. And they asked me if I would do a page, which was only 6 by 9 inches. It was a small format magazine at that point. I didn't have a lot of room to do something, but I wanted to do something epic, and I decided to take the most important, serious piece of literature I could think of, which was Dante's Inferno, and squeeze it down into a very small format, which made me think of Bazooka Joe comics, the bubblegum wrappers that come around like very bad gum. And so I took this epic poem and kind of compressed it into this completely small comic. And the idea was sort of taking this timeless work of literature and combining it with the most disposable kind of comic. I mean, this was in the 80s, and I was thinking a lot about high culture versus low culture. And a lot of those distinctions have completely vanished in the 25 years since I made that strip, 26 years since I made that strip. But at the time, it seemed like a valuable contribution to the conversation. Anyway, they were very happy with that strip, and I was too, and it made me realize there was a lot more I could play with in that kind of combining of high art and low comics culture.
So the Masterpiece Comics from Drawn and Quarterly, that came out in, was it 2009? 2009, I was about to say 2010, so 2009, and that had collected the adaptations that you had been doing up to that point.
Right.
Yes. Now, since then, and in fact, I even wrote a review of it on a blog, you've published Masterpiece mini-comics. Or do you plan on doing another Masterpiece mini leading up to maybe a longer work or another large format Masterpiece Comics?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been heading toward a sequel to Masterpiece Comics since I published the first one, and yes, I've been making small stories. My comics are really short. I do like compression in comics. I'm a big fan of sort of the way that particularly newspaper comics would kind of boil down a story into a small format. So unfortunately for me, that means that when I do a comic, I might spend months learning the style of Peanuts so that I can retell Kafka's Metamorphosis. But then once I've done that, I have to learn a new style to do the next story. So since my book came out in 2009, I've been slowly generating more work toward a second volume. So Masterpiece Mini Comics is one collection of those short stories, and then since then I've also done stories for Fable Comics, which is coming out published by First Second this season. I did some work for the graphic canon of children's literature, and all of these stories and many more will be collected in another volume. Yes.
Now you're also doing these mini comics, and I have a couple of in front of me now. There's one, Poet Poe, which is an adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe, and then Whitman, which is Song of Myself, and the comic, I haven't cracked this yet, that you are parodying is...
Jack Kirby Monster Comics.
Monster, okay. I was about to say there's a Kirby-esque feel to that, but I didn't want to say something Kirby-esque, and you say, oh, no, not at all. So are you going the route now of publishing these individuals in mini-comic form and then collecting them maybe in a larger mini-masterpiece and then the larger format?
Well, the mini-comics that you've just mentioned are actually part of a series of 24-hour comics that I was doing. Okay. My work is really incredibly time-consuming. When you're, like, for instance, the Crime and Punishment story I mentioned boils the novel down to a 10-page 1950s style Batman comic, and that took me a very long time to produce. So I've been trying to find other ways of making comics to kind of keep my hand in producing work without kind of having the weight of fulfilling all of Dostoevsky, or I'm working on a long Herman Melville story right now that's taken me a very long time. So these Whitman and Poe comics were done as 24-hour comics, which is the Scott McCloud constraint of producing comics within one 24-hour period of time. So in the case of these, I'm taking pre-existing poetry, not editing it down, but taking it and changing into comics. In the case of Whitman, it's in the style of Kirby Monster Comics. 5 pages of that were redrawn to be more Kirby-esque, and they appeared in the new Drawn and Quarterly anthology that just came out, the 25 Years collection.
The one that was up for an Ignaz, yeah.
Yes. And then Poet Poe is in the style of Harvey Comics. I thought Poet Poe was a good parallel to Richie Rich.
Yeah.
So that's where that came from. So these are... I may develop this farther. I think there may be a book in that is all poetry adaptations, but or poetry illustrations, I guess you'd say, because they're not really edited down. They're the full poems. We'll see what happens with those. Those were kind of an experiment.
Do you find it more challenging to adapt poetry over narrative fiction?
Well, as I said, both of these poets' poems were adapted in the course of 24 hours. So it was
you were forced to.
It was sort of like a quick generation of drawings to complement the text. I would say adapting the novels is more difficult because there is a lot of compression, there's a lot of editing, there's a lot more nuance involved in terms of finding parallels in the comics that I choose with the characters in the novel. Both of these minis are more improvisational.
Okay. Now, another example of your adaptation work that I have in front of me, and I even emailed you before we got here to SPX that I specifically wanted to get hard copies of these because they're so damn unusual. The unabridged graphic adaptation, iTunes Terms and Conditions, and so one volume is part A and B, and then the other one is part C and D. How do you want to describe this?
All right, well, I'll describe what it is, and then we can talk about why.
Yeah.
Because that is maybe the question that most people are more interested in. But the unabridged graphic adaptation, iTunes Terms and Conditions, is the complete text of the iTunes agreement adapted into a comic. So I have edited nothing. I have not corrected the typos that I found. I think I found 2 typos. The punctuation errors, not any other errors. But I've taken the entire text, broken it down into panels, and combined it with artwork taken from old comics, which I've redrawn, and I've inserted Steve Jobs as the main character. So there's a page from Hellboy, there's a page from Astro Boy, there's a page from X-Men, there's a page from Peanuts, Dilbert, Mr. Natural, The Walking Dead, Adventure Time Comics, Little Nemo, Calvin and Hobbes, and many more. And in each case, I've chosen a page where there's a main person who's doing most of the talking, and that person ends up being the Steve Jobs icon who's kind of in the place, who's reciting the text of the agreement to the other people in the scene, or fighting with them, or being killed, or what have you. So it's all situations that you may recall from other comics, but they're all filtered through the...
Is that hot stuff there that I see?
Yes, we've got hot stuff in here too.
Okay, so now the why.
Well, I'm grappling with... I don't even know how to say it. It's a tough thing. I'm grappling with the form of the graphic novel. Graphic novel at this point is sort of a word that's synonymous with comic strip, but the way that most people consume comics these days are long-form graphic novels. My work tends to be short. It tends to be very compressed, and I was interested in making a work that had the length of of what we think of as a graphic novel. So this is a 94-page project, plus end papers and covers, spread out over 2 volumes. So I was interested in making a long-form comic, but I am not a fiction writer, and I'm really a formalist, I guess you'd say. So I'm really interested in seeing how other people make comics. So this was an opportunity to sort of filter my interest in that through this like impenetrable text. It's not that impenetrable, but this often unpenetrated text that no one reads, and seeing how what it would be like to combine those two. Like, as I said before, most of my work is about the absurdity of combining these elements together. The iTunes book isn't overtly humorous, but it's covertly hilarious. I would say.
So you any indication that anyone over at the Apple Corporation is aware of this?
I have not. I only started now posting it on Tumblr. I wanted to finish it all before Apple necessarily found out. I hope they'll appreciate it in the spirit in which it was done. I don't have Steve Jobs doing anything unseemly. Probably nothing more unseemly than he's doing in the new movie that's coming out this month.
I was going to say now the second volume, parts C and D, that just recently came out, right?
Yeah, that's actually premiering here.
So I was thinking that's rather good timing with the new movie.
Right. And if I had really thought it through, I would have chosen a page where I made Magneto into Steve Jobs, since Michael Fassbender, who plays Magneto, is also now playing Steve Jobs.
Oh, that's right.
But I started this, and I did the X-Men page early on, and I didn't put two and two together. And
any conscious timing on your part between this second volume and the movie?
Oh, not at all. I actually started this last year. I started it in September of last year. I actually started it as a 24-hour comic, and then, of course, I had to work much longer on it. But my notion was to finish it very soon. But while I was working on it, it turned out that they updated the terms and conditions, made them longer. I had to go back, re-edit the text. Not re-edit, but I had to replace the earlier text with the updated text, and I had to add 20 pages to the end of it. So it's coming out now only because Apple decided in June that they had to revamp the agreement. So they made me more work, and that pushed it to the release date of the movie. So I guess I'm lucky now.
Yeah, I don't know if you should dislike them for making you do more work, or be pleased that they gave you more content to work with.
Well, in a way, it was great because it was really difficult to choose only 94 comic styles for this book. I tried to be very ecumenical, and certainly a lot of the comics I grew up with are present, such as Peanuts and The Incredible Hulk by Jack Kirby. But then I was able to get in Kate Beaton and Raina Telgemeier, Jillian Tamaki, and Craig Thompson, and a lot of newer cartoonists as well. So it was fun to sort of parody living cartoonists, which I don't do as often as I could.
Okay. So now, in terms of your adaptations, you've covered a lot of ground when it comes to the classics, a lot of styles, and a lot of both, I guess, older and, as you're saying now, contemporary creators. What, from what you can tell us, are your future plans with other adaptations?
Well, there's so many literary classics that I would love to adapt, and there's so many comics that I'd love to spend time really like digging in and learning how they made them. So unfortunately, I won't live long enough to get to all of those, but I intend to keep going. As I mentioned, I'm working on a Long Herman Melville piece right now, and I'm blanking out a little bit, but I do have a notebook filled with ideas for other strips, so I have a lot of things in the pipeline that I'd like to get to. Mary Shelley is someone I'd like to deal with. If I can figure out how to do the Canterbury Tales, I would love to do that. So there's a ton of books that I would love to get to. Ulysses, so many other ones. So I could rattle off names of things, but until I actually have them printed, I don't want to talk about them too much because there's so much formulation that has to happen before I even start drawing that I don't want to. I can't give you like upcoming attractions yet.
And maybe a better question is to ask you about your definition of a classic, because one of the things I found in doing a lot of work on comics and adaptation is that it's usually an adaptation of what one would consider a classic, something that is not only read by quite a number of people that you would probably consider canonical, but something written in previous centuries. But what do you do with, let's say, 20th century texts? Would you adapt something like Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms or The Great Gatsby, or even more recent, Philip Roth's Portnoy's Complaint?
Well, I do. I think it's really hard to tell in the moment that you're living what's going to live on. So Portnoy's Complaint is that 50 years at this point?
Yeah, it was 1969 is when it came out.
Okay, so I mean that's getting the point where we can perhaps guess.
And also, Philip Roth is now collected in the Library of America, right. So you know that he's here for the long haul. But also other people like Toni Morrison. She's not going anywhere anytime soon.
Right. Well, there is not. I don't just worry about the public domain aspect of material, but it does cross my mind. Certainly there are contemporary authors I'd like to work with, but I don't know if I'll get to that point. I think the most recent person I've adapted has been Samuel Beckett. Who's pretty recent, considering the length of the written word. I do try to choose things that kind of already in the canon. Part of the reason I started this project, and what still kind of keeps me interested, is that we have a perception of these iconic works that are timeless and kind of above the fray. So I like sort of bringing them to my level, which is comics. And even as comics are gaining in credibility and the perception of comics is certainly growing to the esteem that I hold comics in. So that dynamic is changing a bit. But I certainly am interested in choosing work that at least has a glimmer of recognition with an audience. I mean, I've always been interested in reaching an audience, even if I perhaps confound their expectations in the way that I adapt something. I like letting people in terms of sort of being aware of, oh yeah, I know what the Scarlet Letter is, or I'm aware of that. So that recognition is important to me. I mean, even the iTunes Terms and Conditions, it's a document that many people feel that we should read, the same way that people say, well, you should read, the Canterbury Tales. So certainly there's kind of a not a chiding exactly, but certainly there's a sort of an insistence that this is important and should be considered, and I like sort of playing off that.
Well, where can people go to find out about your work as you update it?
All right, well, I'm on Tumblr, and I'm on Tumblr as R. Sikoryak. That's Rsikoryak, and the iTunes pages are currently at iTunes TNC on Tumblr. You can also just find me at rsikoryak.com.
Okay, so that'd be the easiest way of just finding you.
Sorry, I kind of talked in circles here. I've been talking all weekend.
That's okay. Well, Bob, thank you very much for talking with the podcast, and it was nice to finally meet you in person. We've been corresponding for a couple of years. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, Derek. Thanks.
And there's just one of the books I had the most fun with last year was Last of the Sandwalkers by Jay Hosler. Jay, how are you?
I'm good, Andy. How are you?
Good. Now, once I read Last of the Sandwalkers, I didn't realize you had other books that were science-related. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about you and science and comics?
Sure. Well, my love of comics and science sort of ran in parallel for most of my life until I was just finishing up with my PhD, getting ready for my postdoc, and I was reading this book about bees because I was going to be working with bees, and I thought to myself, wow, this would be a great story. Someone should make a comic from it. And I did the dope slap about a year later and realized that someone could be me. And so in 2000, I did the biography of a honeybee called Clan Apis. And then followed that up in 2003 with a story about Charles Darwin, who's sort of one of my scientific heroes, called The Sandwalk Adventures. And that's sort of the story of a conversation between Charles Darwin and two follicle mites in his left eyebrow who think he's their creator. And so we sort of get some of his biography as he dispels their myths, and at the same time he sort of tells a story of his own theory.
Wow, that is really cool.
Yeah, it was a fun book to do. It's kind of a challenge, right? So you're balancing sort of religion and science, and how do we tell stories about ourselves and our own creation. And then that was followed up by a comic books textbook called Optical Illusions, which I got a National Science Foundation grant to make.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I had the big thrill of writing a graphic novel called Evolution, and I worked with Kevin Cannon and Xander Cannon, who are two friends of mine, but also two sort of heroes of mine. So it was that was a nice experience. And then finally, after 10 years, Sandwalk Adventures was born at SPX in 2004 when my son Max, who's 15 now, was only 5. And I was doodling fun little bugs, little beetles. And that one sketch sort of evolved into a 300-page book.
That is wild. Now, I have to ask you, what came first, your love of science or love of comics?
Well, it was the love of science. So I was a big dinosaur fan. And when I was, in the 70s, my dad and mom took us out west. And so we drove cross country in a brown Chevy Impala with white vinyl interior, no, air conditioning, from Indiana to Utah, Dinosaur National Monument. I know, and we stopped at Wall Drug, and my parents were both educators. And they always said there was money for books, and I saw a spinner rack of comics, which I wasn't really familiar with. And saw Marvel Team Up number 19, which was Spider-Man teaming up with Khazar in the Savage Land battling Stegron the Dinosaur Man.
I had that issue.
Yes, it's fantastic, isn't it? And I said, Mom and Dad, this is kind of a book, right? It's got dinosaurs in it. And, they realized if they got it for me, it would purchase probably a half hour to an hour of peace and quiet. I got into that book, I got into Spider-Man, and then I really connected with Peter Parker, right? So once I'd read a little more and discovered that Spider-Man was actually a bespeckled, skinny, geeky, nerd science kid that girls didn't like, it was that all-star moment for me, right?
Like, this is me, this is my life.
Exactly. And so it was really the science that drew me into the comics.
Well, one of the things that I really like about Last of the Sandwalkers is it is educational. You can learn a lot about the insects that are there, but it's a lot of fun too. And each of your characters kind of takes on the characteristics of that insect.
Right.
How difficult was that to pull off?
I think that's why it takes so long to make these sometimes, is because you spend a lot of time thinking through how you're going to map human characteristics onto whatever. I mean, most of what I do is about insects. That's the thing that inspires me now. And so, figuring out how you're going to map those things, and then also figuring out how you weave science in so it isn't overly didactic, right? I mean, I call it natural science fiction. Yeah. Because, if you take historical fiction, right? A few people who read like a John Jakes novel will say, "Oh man, I really got weighed down by the history." You don't. You say, "Oh wow, there's really cool contextual information." And so my approach has always been to try to do the same thing with science, so that it's the contextual stuff, it's the realm that you're moving through, and that you don't view it as sort of, oh, here's a cul-de-sac from the story where he's going to explain this stuff to us, but that you actually have to know some of it to proceed through the plot.
Yeah. With so much emphasis now on STEM and science, which is great, I'm so glad to see that. How do you see that shaping other creators that might want to do science-based graphic novels and comics?
I think you're starting to see publishers produce more science-based graphic novels. And I think that what I'm hoping for, right, I have a very specific philosophy, which is some graphic novels on science are really just lushly illustrated textbooks. They're still just as stilted and still just as unapproachable, right? Yeah. And I think unsuccessful. And I think this is partly you have to convince the publishers of this, that a story provides context, it provides scaffolding for all this information. And if you want to just make it a vehicle for like content, dispersal, you can do that, but you don't use the value of the medium. And so what I hope to see is more and more approaches where storytelling almost moves to the fore, and that you spend the time to structure the science of the world, whatever world you're occupying, whether it's physics, chemistry, etc., to support that structure and of story in such a way that the kids walk away remembering the story and sort of de facto remembering the science. And you think about, my boys growing up, and they can memorize all the Pokemon, they can memorize all the magic cards, they can tell you every episode of every cartoon. And the reason is because all of those have a story, and we're wired to remember stories. So I'm really hoping that we can use that, and less to specifically teach, and more to inspire, right? More to show people there's this amazing world out there. If it's not really that intimidating, if you're willing to dip your feet into it. So it's sort of the approach I take with my teaching, too, is that, yes, there's got to be some content delivery, but at some point I have to make you excited enough to read on your own, because I can't teach you anything. You ultimately have to teach yourself. And so if you don't want to read the textbook, you won't, or you won't remember it. But if you want to get into a story, well, we go back to stories time and time again.
And I think, again, that's one of the great things about Last of the Sandwalkers is it's just such a compelling story. You care about these characters. You want them to when they get away and they start their explorations, you're like, you want them to succeed.
Right.
But you're learning about science at the same time. But like you said, it's story that drives it, and it keeps the pages turning. And I put this in the hands of several kids already, and they love it.
Oh, so that phrase, the hands of several kids. Yeah, that is my. I love to hear that. Thank you.
So what's next on the horizon for you?
Well, I'm gonna do ants. I have an idea for ants. It's going to be about an unusual friendship. It'll be essentially about a cartoon ant born into a world of leafcutter ants who can't really communicate with her sisters. And so, it taps into the whole idea of being different. And then she's going to meet another ant that she can talk to, but that ant has a secret and it's a little bit dark, right? And so it'll be shorter than Last of the Sandwalkers, but it will be about friendship and what it means to accept somebody even when they're not what you think they should be.
Again, it sounds like a great story.
It'll be fun, I think. I'm really excited about it.
Will this be with First Second as well?
You know what? We haven't found a publisher yet. I mean, I haven't really even started. I've sort of written half of it. I've started drawing a little bit of it. So we haven't really shopped it around yet.
Okay. Well, we'll be looking for it, and best of luck with it, and I hope the rest of the convention is a great time for you.
Well, I appreciate it, Andy. It was really nice talking to you.
Nice talking to you too, Jay.
All right.
I'm sitting with Nick Bertozzi at SPX 2015. How has everything been for you this weekend?
It's been lovely, and I really love coming here, and I love seeing how old I'm getting compared to the young people. I'm 45. I've been coming here since 19, the last century, last millennium, 1998, 97.
Speaking of age,
yeah,
memory issues.
And I feel it's wonderful to see what the people that started this convention have done to create a diverse and inclusive space and how that's grown into the convention it is now. And it's just it makes me burst with pride to see how people treat each other here, and how kind people are, and how different groups interact. I love it.
And it's interesting that you start off talking about this, in that I was talking with Dean Hashbiel earlier, and he was mentioning the fact that he feels like an old person here with all of the young attendees and the people who are exhibiting are much, much younger than him. I mean, do you have that feeling that now you're one of the older generation here at SPX?
Yes, not quite an elder statesman. I got to get. I don't own a estate, so I'm happy to be here, especially to see all my students. I teach at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, and I've been teaching there this is my 13th year, and so if I've had 30 kids per class, let's say over 300 students, and so many of them wind up here. And SPX is really alumni weekend for me. And I see all my old students, and it's they're almost like my little sons and daughters that have come into the world and are growing up, and some have done really well, and some are still on the road to figuring things out, and we just chat for a while, and they listen to my wisdom and my genius, and everything's perfect. No, it's incredible to see how people grow, and to watch young kids really turn into adults. And when we have this weird thing that we talk about, comics, and that connects us, but it allows us to enter each other's lives, and it's so gratifying, and I'm so happy when they come up to me. And want to check in and let me know how much they've grown and what they've accomplished, and I'm so proud of them. I can't even tell you.
Well, the way that you're talking about and kind of beaming about your students now as we're talking reminds me of something that I saw just a little while ago when I first met you at your table. You were talking with a couple of younger kids. These were teenagers, less than, 16, I guess? How old were they?
The little kids?
Yeah.
The ones that were doing the magic tricks?
Yeah.
Oh, they must have been 12 or so.
Wow, that young. But the way that you were talking with them and the way that you were getting them interested in your work, or at least those that they could see, because you were really clear, this is not for you, the rubberneck issues, right? And then this is okay. But the way that you were working with them and interacting with them, I mean, it was just really impressive. I mean, you had a way with those kids.
I'm a bit of a mercenary. If there's not 12-year-olds today, there's going to be nobody reading my comics 6 years from now. And I have kids. I have 2 daughters, 14 and 8, and I love hanging out with them and being with them. And I like it when kids come to conventions, and I like talking to them. I used to do a lot more work for Nickelodeon, and so I had that more of a connection with the kids and at conventions, and it was so fun because they're so happy to be there, and it's all new to them, and they're not trying to strike a pose, and you can see their eyes are flitting around everywhere, and they're just so excited by everything they see, and I don't know, that enthusiasm rubs off on me, and it makes me so happy. And this kid was doing magic tricks for me, and he was really good.
Oh, I didn't see him do the magic trick, so the kid was actually at the table doing magic tricks for you?
Yeah, he made my pen disappear. I mean, it was as good as Ricky Jay. He knew who Ricky Jay was. That's what's even crazier. I was so impressed with him. Drew was his name, and his friend was his sort of manager, who was kind of getting Drew to open up a little bit about his magic tricks. And so I said, Drew, you gotta do a magic show for us here next year. Maybe we'll schedule a magic show. Maybe we can ask the organizers to schedule a magic show for you. I know it sounds cheesy, but I would love to have. I mean, anything to get more kids in. There's not enough kids at SPX. I mean, there's teenagers, but I would love to have 12-year-olds, 10-year-olds, just to be. I mean, I don't do comics for kids. I have a comic for kids that I've been meaning to publish, but just finding the dollars to print it, I just haven't gotten around to it. I will do that, and I want to. I'm not walking my own talk, so shame on me. I'm realizing this as I'm speaking, so I better shut up.
Well, to set a little context for Drew and his magic tricks, he was up talking with you about your Houdini book, yes. The one that you and Jason Lute did, and. Of all the work that you have out on your table with people young as well as older coming by, is that the one that tends to draw their interest the most?
Yeah, it's Houdini. It's magic. I mean, people love magic, right? That's even though people know it's not real. It's an illusion. People love to be the victim of an illusion. It's just it gives you that momentary thrill, and I think. Houdini is so ubiquitous, and everybody, he's the original Superman, and everybody wants to escape something in their life. There's some past, some shameful event in our past, and I think you can relate to an escape artist, an illusionist and escape artist like Houdini in that sense. It speaks to some primal need to get out somehow, and I think what a character he is too. He's just he's fun to draw, and he's fun to. I'm sure it was fun for Jason to channel his words through the comic.
Now that was a second book, correct?
Hyperion.
Oh, Hyperion. Okay, what am I thinking of? Am I thinking of your Lewis and Clark?
Lewis and Clark. Hold on, Shackleton, Stuff.
Second.
Those are all my second books, and Jerusalem, a family portrait about the beginning of Israel with the writer Boaz Yakin, who's a movie fella. He does a lot of movies. So if you've ever seen, you got to see this movie Fresh from 1994. If you liked The Wire, you will love Fresh.
Fresh, and he wrote it?
He wrote it and directed it. And it's why I said yes to taking on the Jerusalem book, this enormous, nearly 400-page book that almost made my hand fall off.
That was kind of a thick text, and I didn't see it up at your table. Did you bring it? Did you sell out?
I had one, and I sold it right away. I I was not so prepared for SPX this year. I'm working on an Andy Warhol graphic novel with a terrific artist. I've written it, but I had to lay it out, and my timing was terrible this year, so I didn't get everything done I wanted to get done, and that was one of the things, was ordering more Jerusalems, because those are, I sell out of those every time I bring them.
Okay, so what is this Andy Warhol project that you're working on right now?
I'm so glad you asked. So Andy Warhol was the biggest commercial illustrator in New York. He used to draw shoes, he used to draw flowers, and he was incredibly successful at it. He bought a house on the Upper East Side in the 90s in the streets, the 90s, not the 1990s. And he realized, though, that I'm going to be I'm a popular illustrator now, but what about 2 years from now? What about 5 years from now? And he realized he had to move into gallery art. He always wanted to be a gallery artist, but he had always been a little hesitant to do so because it's such a difficult milieu. And so he took all his money and he spent it all by hiring an assistant to help him become a printmaking artist. And so it's his journey. It's really his story about going from being a commercial illustrator to trying to get into the gallery world. And he was very out and very and in a world when there wasn't you weren't out. He was very obviously gay, and so the kind of macho world of painting, they wanted nothing to do with him. He was anathema to them. So it's about that difficulty that he had, kind of putting himself into the gallery world. He didn't even his first show was not in New York. His first show was in L.A. Nobody would show the Campbell soup cans in New York. Nobody would show the Campbell soup cans in New York. And we think of Warhol now as this legendary figure who just exploded in this explosion of smoke and electricity as this fully formed Zeus, Promethean character, bringing us the fire of art. And really, he's a guy who struggled as much as anybody, and even more so because growing up in Pittsburgh in a working class family, there was no road no pathway that he could follow to become an artist in the way that many of the artists in the generation before him had, who are often middle class or upper middle class, who were able to find a pathway into art way because they had friends or family that had done it before them, and Andy did it himself completely against the odds, and so it's a terrific story about that process of how he turns into the creature that we now know as Warhol.
So you're into this project now. Will this be another second book, or might it go to another publisher?
This is Abrams, and I'm very mercenary with this. I know they are very good to selling to gift shops and art and the bookshop portions of museums. So the MoMA Museum. So Abrams, the publisher, they publish a lot of art books for monographs.
Is this part of that series they have? I mean, there's one just recently that came out on Picasso, and then another on. Okay.
No, not at all. No, it's its own thing, and it's Piers Hargan is the artist, and your jaw will drop when you see the cover. It's so gorgeous, and I'm so excited to be working with this young person and kind of, again, to go back to the beginning of our conversation, to bridge the gap between a 45-year-old and a 25-year-old or something. A 20-year decade. We have this language in common, and it's really, I cannot wait for people to see this book.
When can we expect to see this?
I hope this time next year or November of next year. Not all things. I hope all things go well. There's a lot of pages. It's going to be 152 pages or something like that. So it's going to take a little while to finish up.
Now, you seem to have a penchant for working with historical figures or historical periods. I mean, we have, there's Andy Warhol, there's Shackleton, there's Houdini. There's the Palestine book that we mentioned, Lewis and Clark. Do you prefer to work within a historically based context, or is that just the way things have worked out lately?
From if you're going to pitch a book, I think it's, from my perspective, I'm not the most saleable comics artist. I don't have the flashiest style. I'm not the best designer. I'm solid. I'm not fishing for compliments. I'm just trying to be realistic about my work, and so I needed something that would connect with people outside of my own stories and my own artwork. And that was, it's a very, maybe perhaps it's a little shallow to say that, but I was interested in history, so it's not like I did it just to find an audience, but a lot more people know Houdini than Bertozzi, right? So I'm already using the third person with myself, so that is a little shallow.
Now, is that one of the reasons why you don't do Rubberneck anymore?
I do it, but I have to fill it in between the other books.
So Rubberneck continues to come out.
Rubbernecker has been, I've done an issue a year the past few years. I was supposed to have an issue out, but I screwed up Warhol, and so number 7 was supposed to be out for this show for SPX, but I blew it. I'll be the first to admit.
Wow. Okay. I have to plead ignorance here. I thought that you weren't doing that anymore because I haven't seen an issue in a long time. But maybe it's just where I'm going to get my comics.
No, I self-publish them, and I'm not seeking out distribution. If you want to get them from me at a convention, or if you want to just email me, we can figure it out. I have a store NB page, and I'm setting up an Etsy page soon, so they'll be available on the web. I sell them at a few stores in New York, and a couple down here in DC, and a couple in the Boston area. But if I go to California, I'll sell them. I'll bring a few copies there, but it's not something I don't need to make a lot of money with it, and I don't want to have the burden of making it a full-time job, because that caused a long 10-year gap, and why I didn't work on Rubbernecker. And between 4 and 5 was 10 years. Rubbernecker 4 and 5 was 10 years, and so I needed to find a way to make it about the joy of making comics rather than this desperate drive for monetary gain. Although I'd love it if it made money, but there's also the part of me that thinks maybe I would be too afraid to do an issue if I had to do it for money, just because the expectations would be too much for me. I am Shell. I'm talking about money again. Oh my God.
Well, Nick, I want to thank you for talking with us on the podcast, and good luck with the Andy Warhol. You definitely whetted my appetite for this book now.
You will love it. Thank you, Derek.
Jason Little, your work, Borb, was nominated for an Ignatz Award, and we learned last night, unfortunately, it wasn't chosen. But for my money, it was the one that deserved it. So I don't know if that's the most optimistic or upbeat setup, but I just want to let you know, I did vote for this. I do think that it definitely deserved the prize. So congratulations on the nomination.
Thank you very much.
And for those who aren't aware of Borb, what would be a way of introducing our listeners to what the comic is all about?
Well, initially, you look at it and you might notice that I've designed it to resemble a comic strip, an American comic strip from the 1920s. And that's deliberate. I didn't put gutters in between the panels. I studied Frank King and Harold Gray to see how they did shading and how they built bodies and drew backgrounds. Because the protagonist is a sad, alcoholic, homeless man, and I wanted to evoke the early 20th century tramp, hobo, vagabond archetype, but then have that character pass through a series of adventures that were taken from my vision of what actual contemporary homeless people go through.
So what was the spark that started Borb?
I think I had just... Well, it's almost like two things that came together. I've always wanted to do a daily strip, and I feel like for a lot of cartoonists that represents kind of the holy grail of cartooning. Like Jack Cole worked in comic books his whole life, managed to actually sell a daily to the syndicates, and then killed himself. I don't know if there's a relationship there, but I've always wanted to do a daily. And But I've realized over time that it's just never going to happen. I'm never going to be able to sanitize my work enough to be able to sell it to a syndicate. But then I thought, well, I can just do it for myself. I'll do one a day and I'll put it up on the internet. And I had seen James Kachalka doing a daily autobiographical strip, like a diary strip, and Dustin Harbin doing the same thing. And they've spoken about how it's a great rhythm for making comics, and how they just, it seems like a little bit of work a day, and then when they look back, they've done like a whole book's worth without even really realizing it. And so it seemed like it would be good for my sort of artistic health. And I had also been working in animation for years and been away from comics for too long, and knew that I needed to do something that I could get in front of a readership quickly. And so a daily seemed to be just the thing. So that's one thing. The other element was that I had this idea for a homeless guy character knocking around in my head for years. Someone who was kind of like Bluto from Popeye, a little bit. A big guy. And I had seen, because, you think of homeless people as being in need of food. In New York City, that's not the case, because there's so much abundance of throwing food away that the dumpster diving in New York is really great. It's not the most nutritious food, necessarily. But so you actually see obesity among people on the street. And so I had this sort of shambling, silent character in mind. And at one point I was even thinking of doing photo funnies with this guy, where I would take photographs of city backgrounds and get people to be the secondary characters, like have actors be the secondary characters. And then take those and then draw Borb into those scenes so that it would be more of like a radical juxtaposition of the archetype hobo character with reality. But I decided that was just too much work, and would be in conflict with the spirit of banging out this strip in a rapid way as sort of like a loosening up exercise. That was too precious.
So you were able, and I think the individual strips are dated, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, those are all dates from 2013.
So did you miss a day during the creation of Borb?
I think there might have been one day when I posted the Tuesday strip on a Wednesday morning or something like that, but no, I kept to the cycle pretty closely.
So, okay, the daily strip I can understand. Why the topic of a homeless individual? And by the way, I didn't even think about the whole Bluto reference until you mentioned it, but now it makes perfect sense looking at him.
Yeah. Though at the same time, he's got, in most of his character design wanders a little bit, but in some of the panels he's got thick calves and thick forearms and kind of an alley-oop Popeye kind of way too. That's another Seagar connection, and V.T. Hamlin. There's a question. You had a question before.
Why the homeless?
Oh, right. Okay, that's an important question. I think again, two reasons. So living in New York since 1995, I think I moved to New York. Is just omnipresent. The phenomenon of homelessness is everywhere, and it's frustrating to live in New York and have people on the street who are suffering and feel powerless. And the cycle usually is that people move to New York, they find themselves giving a few bucks to homeless people now and then they start to become hardened by that experience. They stop giving money. And they usually don't get around to giving money to charities that help the homeless people. And so I felt like I wanted to be able to contribute in some way, and at the same time I had this desire, like the idea for the character rose up, and it seemed like, I should talk about this. But prior to that, I had, if you look at my previous body of work, most of it is in color. It's sort of young adult comics. It's light. There's no real hardship in it. There's no suffering. There's no real brutality. It's not grim. And I always identified myself as somebody who didn't have grim or really dark content in my comics.
Yeah, Shutterbug Follies does not strike me as a grim narrative.
Yeah. a friend of mine read that and described it as bubblegum noir, which was that became sort of like a tag that I attached to it.
How did you feel about that tag?
Oh, I love it. It's Eli Bishop, who's also a cartoonist. He goes by the pen name of Hob. He does mini comics under the name Hob. So I always thought that I was just going to be like a light and sunshiny kind of cartoonist. And then I started to have peers that I noticed that terrible things were happening to them. Like I remember looking at Anders Nilsson and his books about his girlfriend dying of cancer. And when I was in my 30s, I saw those books in the store and said, I just didn't want to read them. It's like that was just too scary. I didn't even want to engage with like serious, tragic content, even as a reader. And then my friends Tom Hart and Leila Corman's daughter died suddenly, and all their friends sort of like there was this great outpouring of support, and I just started thinking about death, and started thinking about tragedy, and kind of got into it in a way, not in a fetishistic way, but just sort of like I just felt more grown up all of a sudden, and I have kids of my own, and I was thinking about like, what would happen if my kids died, and I felt like my brain like developed as a result of being a spectator to that experience, and I felt ready for grown up content in that way. And then I just thought, I'm going to do this strip with a homeless guy, and I'm going to take it to its logical conclusion. Yeah, I don't want to spoil this story.
We don't want to spoil anything, but we can say that the book is not upbeat.
It starts out slapstick.
Yes, it does begin that way. And when I read it, I have to tell you, I was taken aback. You're right. There is a logical conclusion to this, and so I'm glad that you pushed it to that point. But I was a little surprised at where you went, given the first part, which does come across as slapsticky, because he is this character that we can laugh at the same time that we can feel sorry for him. And that's the way that you present him. But that shifts after you get into the last half of the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like I wanted to try to have my cake and eat it too, and that I wanted, since it's the daily format, I wanted humor to be a big part of it, and I didn't really realize it at the time, but friends of mine who read the book said, "Oh, you're totally tapping into the whole like Chaplin silent like slapstick thing," and I was like, "Oh yeah," and I never had really analyzed that, but it's like the daily strip and silent short movies, comedies like that, they're like really close to each other on this sort of like giant image of art. I forget where I was going with this.
Going from the slapstick to the more dour, right. Yeah.
The sort of change of agenda of the book. Yeah. I guess I wanted to make the reader uncomfortable in a way. I wanted to make them laugh if I could. And humor, like gag humor, has never been something that I thought that I was good at. So I just thought I'd try it and see what happened with like in this sort of like low pressure experimental kind of context. So I went with it, and but I wanted to make the reader uncomfortable. It's like, hey, this guy's making fun of a homeless guy, and I'm laughing at it. That's kind of feels wrong. So it's kind of like an indictment of the reader to us, like you're getting pleasure from this guy's misfortune, but it's also forcing you to like see the misfortune in a way and confront it. You can't not look at it. You're being drawn in by the fact that it's entertainment.
Well, this is interesting now, because I noticed in reading this, in the first half especially, I thought of obviously the slapstick element, and one of the things that contributed to the slapstick tone was the fact that outside of sounds like burping or farting, no words. Just those sound effects, and usually it's bodily functional sound effects, so that's humorous in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
And then you get into the second half of the book, especially toward the end, and you do get dialogue. You do get people speaking. And at the same time, that's when it takes a much more serious and even darker turn. So was there any conscious link between the spoken word or the presence of dialogue in this book and getting a little darker?
Yeah. I don't remember. I think I decided that it was going to be a mostly silent project, but that I didn't want to put a sort of a formal constraint on dialogue. I felt like I'll let people talk if it's really necessary for the story. So it just kind of like came up when it needed to. Was there another element to that question?
No, I was just asking if there was a link between that more serious turn as we get toward the end of the book, and the fact that we do get more spoken word. We get some spoken word.
Yeah. I guess there sort of was. Yeah. I mean, the story becomes more complicated. It's not a 4-panel gag that becomes more continuity the closer you get to the end of the book. And with that complexity, I guess you kind of need more dialogue.
And you lose the link to, let's say, the silent slapstick film once you have people in your narrative beginning to speak one to the other.
Yeah, exactly.
So this came out just recently from Uncivilized, and I'm wondering how you came to Uncivilized Books, or how Uncivilized Books, Tom, may have come to you.
It actually, in a way, they were my first choice for the book, and I was thinking about who to show it to. And I had known Tom when he had lived in New York City, and we were pals, and I knew him, and I knew his line of books, and I knew that content was important for him. Some comics publishers, you can tell that just like visual experimentation is like their thing, and I feel like Tom Kaczynski is someone who is like deeply engaged with content, subject matter, voice, stuff like that. So I wanted to show it to him, but I was talking to my friends and family and stuff like that, and saying, no, you got to aim high and like go with the big fancier publishers like Drawn and Quarterly and Fantagraphics. And I got nice rejection letters from D&Q and Fantagraphics, and actually had nice dialogue with them in the process. So I felt like I got on their radar a little bit more with my more serious book, which was great. But they rejected me, and then I gave it to Tom, and he totally got it instantly and said he wanted to publish it. So I kind of had my cake and was able to eat it too with that.
Yeah, and I'm glad that it's Uncivilized, because over the past 2.5 years, this has been, Uncivilized, one of my favorite publishers, and definitely one of the most exciting, I think. I mean, there are a lot of smaller publishers that I get excited about and we talk about on the Comics Alternative, but Uncivilized is one that we keep coming back to, so I was pleased to see that your book comes out through Tom's.
That's great, yeah, and he's really prospering too, I think.
Yes. Yeah. So where are you going now in your work, now that you have Borb out? What's next? What are you currently working on?
I'm working on a children's graphic novel, which I might end up doing under a pseudonym. So I can't talk about the plot for that, lest some enterprising youngster connect my name to my more adult work and get in trouble with his parents or something like that.
So you would do it under a pseudonym because of your more adult work?
Exactly. It seems like there's already a bunch of adult work that's attached to Jason Little, so I should come up with another name for my kiddie work.
Yeah. It is one of those titles, Jack's Luck Runs Out?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Now, when I approached you just a little while ago at your table, I was surprised to see that you had so many issues, so many copies of Jack's Luck Runs Out, and then I asked you about that, and you said you were a little surprised to discover them as well. Yeah. So what was the backstory there?
Well, it was a Xeric winning book in 1998, and I only printed 5,000 copies or something like that, and I gave away tons of them because since it was a grant that allowed me to print it, I didn't have any overhead, as it were, so I felt like I could distribute it as a calling card. So a lot of them were given away, and then I sold a bunch, and a bunch were distributed through Top Shelf. And so I noticed that recently that it was still in their warehouse, and wrote to them and said, hey, can I buy back some of those copies? And they just gave them the rest of their inventory to me for free, which is really generous. So there was 70 copies left.
So if people want to get a copy of Jack's Luck Runs Out, can they contact you? In fact, in a general way, how can people discover you on the web, on Tumblr, social media? What the best way to get in touch with Jason Little?
Yeah. If anyone who wants to contact me directly, you can go to my very embarrassingly dusty website, beecomics.com, beecomics.com. And you'll see that it's so dusty that there's not even a mention of Borb on there at all. I coded the HTML on there all by myself, and I did such a sort of fossilized job of it that it's very hard to go back in and tinker with it, so I've been ignoring that for years and years. But the email address that's associated with that is still current.
But I can find that email address on the website.
Exactly. And I also have a Tumblr. You can look for Jason Little on Tumblr, and I have a 3D Comics Tumblr that I have also. Yeah.
Well, Jason, thank you very much for talking on the podcast.
It's my pleasure.
I'm here with Simon Rinehardt. He is one of the editors of Dog City, which is a comics anthology. Simon, things are wrapping up here at SPX. How has it been for you this year?
It's been great. It's been really good. This has been a very good show. There's a lot of great work out on the floor, good crowd, a lot of traffic. It's been really nice.
Now, you were telling me earlier before we started to record about your anthology, Dog City Comics. Or is it, I guess, Dog City, and I am not familiar with it, and you were starting to tell me about it. So could you tell our listeners as well as educate me about what Dog City is all about?
Sure. So Dog City was founded by me, Luke Healy, and Juan Fernandez when we were students at the Center for Cartoon Studies. Our first 3 issues, each issue came in a cardboard box and included several individual mini comics, mostly screen printed covers, and collected in the box along with some prints, postcards, ephemera. Our 4th issue, which we just debuted at this show, is a paperback book, and each comic inside is a collaboration between 2 cartoonists. We told our contributors basically, don't collaborate in a new way, don't do one person writes it, the other person draws, do something interesting, and people did a great job. We were really impressed with the work. People turned in fantastic comics that we're really proud to be publishing. So that's issue 4 that debuted yesterday at the show, and it's been gotten a really good response so far.
So, one of the things that struck me is, it's kind of two-sided coin. On the one side, I feel that comics anthologies, not so much on the wane, you just don't see them as much as you used to. On the other side of that coin, if you go down to the very independent self-published level, you do find more and more comics anthologies. You as an editor, is that what you feel as well, or am I off base?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I think at the small press and self-published level that it's a great way to, you get a bunch of artists to turn in work on one thing, and that way you sort of multiply the exposure that people get. I mean, doing things for exposure is a, kind of a dirty word now. And we do pay our artists, not as much as we'd like to, but we pay what we can. And I think it's a good way to group work together. We're always trying to create a dialogue between the artists who are in our anthology, so that somebody who's familiar with one artist might buy the book and get exposed to work by people that they haven't found. And I think that's what you see at the small press level. You see a lot of that. It's a great way to discover artists. I like to buy anthologies, and I'm always finding new great cartoonists through reading anthologies.
Well, how do you and your fellow editors find the artists for Dog City?
Various ways. A lot of them are people we know from the Center for Cartoon Studies, where we went to school. We've graduated now, but we're still in touch with a lot of people. A lot of it is just people whose work we know from the internet. We're all pretty active on Tumblr, looking for new people. People we know personally. It's a mix, and every issue we try to expand the circle a little, broaden the circle a little bit, and find new people to collaborate with.
And how often does the issue come out? The anthology?
Sporadically. The past 3, it's been 1 a year. And that's pretty much around what we're looking at these days. About 1 a year. that's about what we can handle as editors.
So if our listeners wanted to find Dog City and take a look at it and order a copy or find out more about it, where would they go?
dogcitypress.com. You can find more information about both of our issues that are currently in print. You can order them. You can find links to all of the artists whose work is featured in Dog City, previews of the work in there. We put some original, content reviews, stuff like that on as well. So dogcitypress.com is the place to go for that.
Simon, thank you very much for talking with me for the podcast.
Thanks very much. Great talking to you.
I'm here with Mickey Zacchilli, whose book Rav was nominated for an Ignatz Award. Mickey, how has the SPX event, the experience, been for you this year?
It's been good. It's been real fun.
Yeah. Okay, now, I guess the white elephant in the room, or the elephant in the room, not the white elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is, the Ignatz Awards, and you were up for, what was it, the category? Outstanding Artist? Or
graphic novel.
Graphic novel, yes. And so you were nominated. Now, how does it feel now that, kind of a pat question, really, that you didn't get it? Did you think you had a chance? Were you just thrilled to be nominated?
I think I was just thrilled to be nominated. It's always an honor to be nominated.
Yeah.
I don't need to win, but It would have been nice, but hey.
Well, I do have to say that one of the things that the nomination did is to put your work in front of my eyes, because I wasn't aware of your work beforehand. So that's one of the great things about the Ignatz nominations is that people may look at that to say, what is going on in self-published indie work? They can find Rav. And so that'd be great. Now, for the uninitiated, how would you describe Rav?
I usually describe it as like a sort of like Alice in Wonderland type adventure and self-discovery kind of. Sort of like a winding road of a story. A drone comic.
With a little IHOP thrown in.
Yeah, a little bit, definitely.
So are you a frequenter of IHOP?
I've been to IHOP a couple times, yeah.
So, because, it is kind of a meandering, wild, surreal, maybe, narrative that's going on. And this is not a video podcast, so I can't show our listeners, but if they look inside of Rav, the art, how would you describe it? Active, frantic at times, that gives it a kind of energy that almost leaps out of the page. So it goes well with the strange journey that your characters are going on.
Yeah, the drawings are kind of surreal in themselves, and the story is pretty surreal, so yeah.
Okay, so where did you come up with the story, and how are you letting it progress?
The story, I just wanted to, like 6 or 7 years ago when I started it, I just wanted to like make a longer story, so I just kind of started drawing it, and it's kind of just gone its own way. I didn't really plan anything in advance or write anything in advance.
So with each installment, you just write it, and where it goes, that's where it ends up.
Yeah, it kind of like writes itself at this point.
Now, the first book is in, 6 parts?
Yeah, the first book is in 5 parts, but yeah, 5 or 6 parts.
And were each individual part its own mini comic or standalone comic?
Yeah, I would make them, like zines like this one. It's just like a 100-page zine or so.
So what you're doing is, after you collect, about 5 more, you'll come out with another volume of Rav?
Yeah, Youth in Decline publishes the collection, so he's collected, or, in the spring, the second collection will come out, and it will have been like 10 issues, I think.
Okay, so will this second collection be basically a continuation of what we've been seeing in the first?
Yes.
So no surprises other than those that are already embedded in the narrative.
Yeah, no surprises.
Now, you mentioned Youth in Decline. Now, they're putting out the books, but if they wanted the books, they could check out Youth in Decline. But if they wanted to get your individual zines, where would they go to find them?
Most of them are sold out at this point, but I have like a couple of issues in Quimby's and like a couple of other comic book stores around. Like the Beguiling might have some in Toronto, Quimby's. I don't know who else. Maybe Floating World might have a couple of stray issues here and there.
Do you have an online presence where you sell those?
Yeah, I have a online store. It's pricetapes.storeenvy.com. I sell patches and comics there. Sorry.
So our listeners could find you there.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Well, Mickey, thank you very much for taking the time and talking with the Comics Alternative podcast.
Thank you very much.
Wow, Derek, we did 3 shows with all of the creators that we met at Small Press Expo. We probably could have done 3 more. There were so many people there, but we really want to thank all the people that took time to speak with us during all 3 of those shows that we have. It was a great, great weekend.
It was a great weekend, and it was an exhausting weekend. In fact,
yes.
Finishing up this 3rd show, I was reminded of how tired both of us were on both Saturday and Sunday, and just remembering that feeling, I'm starting to feel tired again.
Me too. But, it was worth it. And for anyone who has never been to the Small Press Expo, and Derek, this was your first time, and it was only my second time, I think we would both enthusiastically recommend this to anyone who's interested in comics.
Exactly. And I want to go next year.
Yep, me too.
And as Andy said, thanks a lot to every single individual who spoke with us at SPX, not only the people in this 3rd episode, but among all 3 shows. And if you want to find the comics that these guys are putting out, you can't find better deals than going to our sponsor, and that is Discount Comic Book Service. Their website is dcbservice.com. You can go there and find incredible discounts that will blow your mind.
Ooh.
And after you do get your comics there, then get in touch with us and let us know the kind of things you're going to be reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll see on the right-hand side of your browser a tab that says Send Voicemail. Click on that, and from the comfort of your own desktop or mobile device, you can record a voice message to us through the wonders of SpeakPipe. It's very simple and easy to use. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way. Old school. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
And if you want to find out what we're up to as far as the blog and updates to the podcast, you can follow us on Twitter. We are at the number 2 guys with PhDs. And we certainly appreciate everybody who retweets our tweets.
That's right. We also enjoy getting emails from you guys. You can email the show at 2guys@comicsalternative.com. You can email me directly at derek@comicsalternative.com. And Andy?
You can reach me at wolverton@comicsalternative.com.
And if you like to hang out on social media, then the Comics Alternative is definitely the podcast for you, because you can find us on Facebook, on Tumblr, on Instagram, on Google+, and on Pinterest. And if you like to hang out at YouTube, well, we have a YouTube channel, so check that out as well. You can subscribe to our podcast through iTunes. You can stream the show on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn. And as always, you can find every single one of our episodes, as well as our reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog at our website, which is comicsalternative.com.
That's right.
So there are a lot of ways of getting in touch with us, and we would like to hear from you and know your thoughts about the various interviews that we conducted at SPX last weekend. So please, let us know what you think.
Yeah, do let us know what you think. A lot of creators to explore, hopefully some new ones for you, as well as some old favorites.
That's right. So until next time, I am Derek.
And I'm Andy.
Listen for us later.